Although appreciation and growth is dealing with the future events and therefore you're dealing with opinions, it's still a good indication to see whether there's going to be a beneficial return for you. I love what Warren Buffett says about the first rule of investing. He says, number one, never lose money. Rule number one, never lose money. Rule number two, never forget rule number one. Very simple, very basic, very fundamental, but very powerful. Now, in every investment, because you're going to be making decisions in the present with a hope of a future result or a future outcome, you have to make some strategic assumptions. And one of those assumptions you have to make is that there will be growth. As a matter of fact, if there is no possibility of growth or progress or increase, then you're better off not even starting that investment, because you've already, by going against that decision, you may have violated the first rule of investing. So appreciation is important. And I want to talk about two types of appreciation. There's something called active appreciation and something called passive appreciation. Now, one of the things that I focus on as part of my day-to-day life is property investment or real estate. It's an important part of my life, and I talk about it a lot because I think it's great. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's something anyone can get involved in. You don't have to be technically sound. You just have to have a good understanding of the basics and have people around to support you. But what I find about appreciation is the power of appreciation, particularly in real estate. Now, appreciation applies to any investment stream, whether it's business, commodities, paper assets, or in this case, properties. They all have a level of appreciation. I'm going to be talking about particularly the appreciation of real estate. But what you'll find is that the fundamental principles apply to any investment. Now, I'm going to start with passive appreciation because it's a simple one. Now, with passive appreciation, what we're dealing with here is primarily the increase, the growth of your original capital, your original equity, your original investment, without the influence of the investor, without you doing anything. So I'll give you a good example. Let's assume, for example, that you were to purchase a property, and this is a commercial building you've purchased. Let's assume that this commercial building is in a location called Central London. Let's also assume that this particular part of Central London has, over the last 5-6 years, seen perhaps an 8 to 12% increase, year by year increase in terms of returns or in terms of yield. There's been a steady growth because of the demand for floor space in that particular area. Now, as a result of this, if you purchase this building, after the first year, if this were to have gone up by 10%, let's assume it went up by 10%, not the least, not the most, 10%. If it did that by 10%, what we said is that your property has appreciated in value by 10%. But this appreciation in value is what we call passive, meaning you did nothing to influence the increase. It's just simply come as a result of perhaps the demand-supply graph, the demand-supply requirements in that area. Maybe there are a lot of jobs, a lot of people, there are very few opportunities for floor space. You had nothing to do with that. It could also simply be that the properties around that area, the purchasing power of that currency, in this case pound, has declined, and therefore you need much more. That is passive appreciation. And passive appreciation is important. So in doing every real estate assessment, the first question you want to ask yourself is, what has been the year-by-year increase? Now, this is important, particularly if you're trying to buy a property for the long term to hold. But even if you're buying to sell, you want to know. Because there are some areas whereby if you look over the 10-year period, what you might find is that for the first 4.5 years, there was an increase. For the 2 years after that 4.5 years, there was maybe a very steep, consistent projection, no growth, no decline. And what you might find is by year 7, there's a sudden decline, maybe in the growth potential. This could simply be because maybe there's a lot more supply available and less demand. If you found yourself in this case, you would question whether you should invest in that investment because it doesn't look promising in the future. What you'll find is that you may not be appreciating in terms of your original capital or equity. So you must start every investment by asking yourself, what is the potential appreciation over time? And once you've established that using just history, you must go next to the next important part, which is active appreciation. Now, active appreciation is slightly different from passive. And active means you do something to increase the value. And there are so many things you can do. For example, in this commercial building, you might decide to repaint. You might decide to remodel the building, the entire building. You might decide to perhaps change the tenancy and have it sublet rather than rent it to one whole company. You might say, well, I'm going to rent it out to clients, different clients on every floor, and I can charge an extra. All of these activities we call active appreciation measures. You're doing something to increase the value. And there are 1,001 ways that you can do this. You just have to be disciplined enough to study and be willing to apply. So there are various ways of increasing the value. We call that active appreciation, meaning you get to do something to create a change. Now, if you can combine active appreciation and passive appreciation, then you position yourself in a place whereby, depending on what the numbers say, because you've got to understand something, in both cases, you've got to be looking at the numbers. By active measures, you might be asking yourself, can I increase the value or the return or the income by 10, 20, 25, 30, 40%? So the numbers should always guide your decision. But to grow, for your investment to appreciate in value, always ask yourself 2 questions. How can I influence the growth through active measures? And how can I find the right place to invest that grows through passive measures? I hope that's been useful. God bless.